Thank you for joining today's webinar. Are your rams ready for joining? My name's Jodie Rosé O'Brien and I'm one of the SheepConnect SA team. SheepConnect project is made possible through the funding and support of Australian Wool Innovation, the South Australian Sheep Industry Fund, the Department of Primary Industries and Regions. If you'd like more information about SheepConnect, you can go to our website or you can follow us on Twitter. Today's webinar has been recorded and we'll upload the recording to the SheepConnect SA YouTube channel in the coming days. We welcome you to revisit the webinar yourself or share it with others. Today's presenter is Dr. Sean McGrath. Sean's a vet with over a decade of experience, specialising in production and animal health. In 2014, Sean and his wife purchased the family-owned Millicent Veterinary Clinic and more recently purchased the Kingston Veterinary Clinic. Sean works predominantly as a production animal vet with a growing focus on working with farmers in an advisory setting to ensure productivity is maximised through on-farm management practices, such as animal health programs and feed and budget assessments. At this time, I'll hand over to Sean, who will talk us through getting your rams ready for joining. Thanks, Sean.
Okay, thanks, Jodie. So yeah, tonight we're talking about ram preparation. And so I guess the first question is, well, why do we need to focus on our rams? And I guess there's a few different ways, things to think about. Rams are a mobile delivery unit of genetics, so they need to be fit and able to get around and deliver the genetics that they need to. They are sort of almost a high performance animal, so they have to do a lot of work in a short period of time, so they need to be able to do that. Their genetic contribution is very long lasting, so it can be 10 years or so of their genetics that hang around in your flock. And so if you're investing heavily in genetics, you want to get the most out of them, and so focusing on the rams can protect this genetic investment. And I'll put this photo up. I've found on the web. I think it's from New South Wales, not because of the ram, but more about the number of people that are around the ram. So this is after a sale, and it just struck me that there's a lot of people involved in that ram's purchase, and so there's a lot of people that have got an interest in that, and possibly a lot of money. So I think it's important that we look after our rams to protect the investment that we're putting into them. So some of the other reasons why we focus on rams, or if we drill down a little bit further, if we look after our rams, hopefully we can increase or optimize our conception per cycle. And so, a benchmark that you might work off is a 70% conception rate per cycle. And obviously a lot of work goes into the ewes and getting them ready in terms of condition score and nutrition, but all that good work can be undone if our rams aren't ready to fire and capitalize on that work you put into the ewes. If we get our rams right, we can also decrease our ram percentages. So some people might work on 2, 3, or 4% ram percentages, but if we get them right, we can hopefully get that down to 1% plus 1. And I guess these all drive into just decreasing your costs per lamb born. So that cost of lamb born is a combination of being able to reduce your ram percentage, but also increase the conception rate. And so rams, they really need to be ready to work. So how do we ensure this? I guess really it's centered around what we'd call a pre-joining ram inspection. So why do we do these inspections? And that's to ensure that rams are fit and they're ready to work. So that's structurally in terms of legs, feet and everything else, but also the reproductive organs. So when are we going to do that? It's very important to do it nice and early. And so we sort of say 10 to 12 weeks before joining. But also importantly here, I've put in just to do it before the ram sales. So, you want to go through your rams and make sure that you know how many you need if you cull, which you inevitably will before the ram sales come up, so that you're not caught short after the ram sales and you end up with rams that you either didn't want or a sort of second choice. How are we going to do these ram inspections? So there's a few different options. I think the advent and the widespread uptake of these sheep handlers is a great thing for doing ram inspections. It makes it pretty safe and easy. You can do it over the board with them tipped up. Shearing time may be a possibility for that. Or you can just do it up a race, and we do plenty of them pulling them through a race, just visually observing them and feeling what we have to. So what does it really entail? So there's the 4 T's, which hopefully you've heard of before. So there's the teeth, toes, tackle, and testes. And we'll also put in their body condition score, which is an important thing to keep track of. And so we don't want to be like old Cecil here at a foot off flat saying that if he thinks he'll just sit one out. We want to make sure we're pulling the ones out that aren't fit to join rather than choosing just to sit out. So a brief little anatomy sort of show here. There's a lot of detail in this photo, but what we really want to get you to get out of it is that there's a lot of structures that go into the fertility of rams. And so obviously down the bottom here, we've got the testes, which has got different structures, being the epididymis, and then the vas, which take the semen up away from the testes. But then it goes into the body and goes through a series of other organs that are all play a role in the maturation and the development of the sperm and the semen. So these are all important, and I guess the point here is that they can be affected by different things, and one of the key points here is anything that affects the ram's health will affect can affect the sperm quality. And just one point around the testes also is they sit in a scrotum that can be moved so that they can be moved upwards and close and further away from the body, and that's in aid of temperature control. So temperature is very important, and sperm is very susceptible to temperature changes. So first off, with our 4 T's, we're going to look at the teeth. So we want to check for ages. We want to make sure they've got a sound mouth and make sure there's no obvious lesions or abscesses that are going to stop them from being able to eat. Obviously, they still need to eat to maintain, put on condition, and also maintain themselves through that joining period when they're working hard. Toes, same thing. We want to check for soundness. Anything that's lame, we want to really address and look at hard. So sometimes that's why running them through a race can be good, and that we can sort of try and pick those lamenesses. We want to make sure, obviously, make sure there's no foot rot. That's got other implications. But if there's abscesses, this is the time to treat them and try and get them cleared up. A common misconception probably is that the antibiotics can affect fertility, which is not correct. It's the fever from the abscess that has got more chance of affecting fertility than the antibiotics themselves. So if you've got foot abscesses when you're doing this, certainly treat them with some antibiotics. And it's also a good time to trim some overgrown hooves and just make sure that their feet are all in good shape, ready for that joining period so they can get around. Or the penis is a little bit difficult to do efficiently. So to do it efficiently, as this photo shows, you really need to sort of have them sitting up on their bum, like when you're going to shear them. And there is a little bit of a technique for getting it out. But what we're looking for here is same thing, any swelling, discharges, or redness. That should be a sort of a nice pink look to it. But like I say, this is probably a little bit hard to do, and to be honest, we probably don't look at it a lot routinely. We probably do them up the race and look at other things more so. And then the testes, which is probably the most important, I think. So we look for symmetry. So we want everything to feel the same on both sides. We look for the tone, so we want them to be nice and firm. We check the epididymis, which is that structure which takes the semen away from the testes, and so that's sort of got a sort of a bit of a lump, like a golf ball at the bottom of the testy, and we'll show you a picture in a minute of what to visualize. But we're feeling for those structures. The tone of the testes should be firm, like a bicep or a beer can, and this checking these testes, is making sure that the testes are fine and they're going to produce the sperm and get it to where it needs to be. But it's also a good screen for brucellosis, which we'll chat about in a little bit. But certainly any lumps through the testes or around the epididymis, or any misshapen testes, so one smaller than the other or one larger than the other, is cause for concern and something that you would pull a ram out for So I've got to credit Nathan Scott for this, a consultant from Victoria. I've seen him use a model of these at talks, and so he describes, feeling the testes is like a couple of beer cans with some golf balls at the end of it. And so if you can picture that as the scrotum and a couple of beer cans in there, and that's the tone that we're feeling for, and then the sort of half golf balls at the bottom, which is the tail of the epididymis. And so that's a normal feeling testes and epididymis, and so anything that's abnormal or different to that should raise alarm bells. So we'll just touch a little bit briefly on the sperm cycle. So the sperm cycle takes 6 weeks for full production. So from when the first sperm cell gets made through to the point where it's mature and ready, fertilization takes 6 weeks. And as I was alluding to before in that anatomy picture, there's multiple steps along the way where it has to go through this maturation, but that also means there's multiple steps where it can fail. And so the sperm cycle is very sensitive to high temperatures, and that can be from ambient temperatures, or it can just be from body temperature. So anything that makes the ram hot, and that can be a fever. So any illness can interrupt that sperm cycle. And so this is what we talk about. This is why we say that the ram health is really important, because the ram health can affect the sperm. And the sperm cycle is also day length responsive. So a little bit like ewes, as the days get shorter, the sperm cycle ramps up, and so the production increases. And so rams are a little bit seasonal, the same as ewes are. So this picture here is pretty detailed, obviously, and I guess the point of it really is to show that this is the cell at what's happening at a cellular level, and it's showing you sort of how many steps go into making the sperm cells or the sperm structures. So, like I said, anything along the way that interrupts this, and generally that's a temperature spike, can interrupt either the amount or the actual quality of the sperm. So diseases of concern in rams. I mean, there's not a lot really particular to rams, but I think the obvious one is ovine brucellosis. And we'll talk about that in some more detail. The other one I think that is worth mentioning is worms and fly strike. So ovine brucellosis is a sexually transmitted disease, really. It affects the ram's testes and the epididymis. So these lumps that we're talking about in the testes, it can, certainly be caused by brucellosis. It can be caused by other things, but brucellosis is the one that we're most worried about. So it affects their testes and the epididymis, which really affects their ability to produce semen and affects the plumbing in terms of getting it out. In the ewe, it can cause early embryonic loss. And so what you might see if you have brucellosis before you pick it up in the rams is reduced reproductive performance. And so that can be depending on at what point you're measuring things, but that can be reduced scanning percentages, could be reduced marking percentages, or it could even be seen as a spread out lambing if your lambing's long enough. And that's driven by this early embryonic loss, where ewes might conceive but lose, and then a cycle or two later they can reconceive and hold a pregnancy. So these are just an example of some brucellosis lesions, and also sort of shows what a normal sperm would look like, normal testes would look like. So the one on the right is the normal testes, and we can see that's decent size. And then at the bottom there's that little golf ball-y looking thing, which is the tail of the epididymis. And the one on the left is the brucellosis affected testes, and so the testes itself is actually a little bit smaller, and then the epididymis, obviously there's that golf ball, that's turned into more of a cricket ball almost, and that's a big hard lump, and that's what the brucellosis is doing. And so that's affecting the sperm to physically get out, and anything that does get out is going to be affected in quality. So in terms of brucellosis management, how can you prevent it or manage it? Step number one is buying from accredited studs. So studs that are accredited go through an initial accreditation phase of testing, and then they test every 2 years to prove and ensure that they're free of the disease. So that's step number one. in terms of your own properties, I think annual ram palpation is a really good way to screen for it. And so when we're doing these annual ram inspections pre-joining, this is what we're doing. And so palpating the ram's testes and identifying anything with a lump can then be bled, and we can do a blood test to see if it is brucellosis that's causing the lumps. And this is a pretty good way of screening for brucellosis. And obviously, like a lot of things, prevention is better than cure. So, if we're doing this every year, we can make sure that we're picking up problems. And often tell the story of a client where we were going out and doing these annual ram checks, and we've been doing that for 4 or 5 years, and then all of a sudden one year he had maybe 20 or 30% of rams with lumps and lesions, which turned out to be brucellosis. And what we were able to do there was, implement a bit of a plan for the upcoming joining season, and probably really prevented a bit of a disaster in terms of his conception rates. So that annual screening program is a really good thing. And so eradication, if you do get it, is difficult and it's costly, and it involves a lot of blood testing, usually monthly, if not fortnightly, to try and clear up and eradicate the disease. So we'd rather prevent it than try and deal with it on the property. So I've touched on parasites. So worms are a big consideration for rams, and this is due to a couple of things, and it's simply because they're usually in high burdens because they're highly stocked. They sit in the same paddock year in, year out for 10 months of the year, and that stock density can get pretty high at times. And so, so their pickup is quite high, and they're easily forgotten. We spend a lot of time focusing on drenching everything else, and pre-lambing and weaning and summer drenches and everything else, but it's easy to forget the rams. And so it's important to address their worm burdens. And then fly strike, is probably an issue if it occurs in this period leading up to joining. So in that 6-week period when the sperm's being produced for the start of joining, if we get a fly strike, that can cause a fever and affect the sperm quality. And so that's why I put that in there. So shearing. So when do we do that? I think hopefully you'll pick up the recurring theme here. It's 2 to 3 months prior to joining is the ideal, and that allows rams to recover from the process of shearing, get over cuts, get over the stress of it all, and it also lets them get a bit of wool cover back, which there's some recommendations out around that you want about 25 mil of wool cover for joining. So just so people are aware that the sedation that's used commonly for ram shearing affects their temperature control. So same thing again, the same theme. If their temperature is being altered, that has potential to affect their sperm quality. So if we're shearing, in that few weeks or a month before joining, and we're using sedatives and the temperature's hot, that's a big risk that we're going to make them too hot and affect their sperm quality and affect fertility. So just things to think about when we're shearing is that temperature at shearing, the use of sedation. I think you still need to use it, but let's make sure that we're providing shelter and trying to keep them cool if it is hot. There also needs to be a little bit of care with post-shearing treatments. So some of the backliners, certainly you've seen, sort of scald and skin scald and burns through the administration of backliners, getting too hot in the tubes, sitting next to the race while they wait for the next race full. So just little things like that, just all need to be careful with. So other husbandry things to think about. So vaccinations, same thing. I think it's wise to do these at the same time as inspection. If you're getting them in, let's do these husbandry procedures that we need to. So vaccinations are important, and I think it's important that we keep up boosters, probably mainly for pulpy kidney, tetanus, and cheesy gland. Pulpy rams, are quite susceptible to pulpy kidney, given once again that they get forgotten about a bit, but their intakes can be quite high sometimes, and in so high high quality feed time periods, they can gorge a lot and give themselves pulpy kidney. Cheesy gland's an important one because once again, there's a potential for fevers being caused by the cheesy gland infections, and that can affect the sperm quality, as we mentioned. And then considering lice treatments, when are we doing that? Once again, hopefully we're not doing that a few weeks before joining, especially if we're plunge dipping. So nutrition's an important consideration. So we sort of want to aim for a body condition score of 3.5. We don't want them too fat, and we don't want them too skinny. Obviously, we're probably all pretty familiar with how much weight they can strip in a joining period. They work pretty hard, and they can go in at pretty high condition scores and come out pretty lean pretty quickly. So we need to make sure the nutrition's right and setting them up for success in that joining period. And so doing a condition score at this RAM inspection, once again, if we're doing it months in advance, that can give us time to correct their condition if we need to. So if they're a bit light on, we can preferentially feed them or, give them a bit of grain to get that condition score up. Rams are a bit, or they are sort of sensitive or responsive to flushing, are much the same as what ewes are. And so a flush with lupins can be at, say, 400 grams per head per day, depending on, what feed quality you've got around. That can increase sperm production. And so that can be a handy little trick to use. And another little tip probably is just ensuring that they're adapted to grain if ewes are being fed during the joining period. And so that's really around reducing the risk of acidosis. So if ewes are being fed grain and a relatively high amount of grain in the joining period, and the rams aren't used to that, and they go out there, there's that risk that they gorge on a bit of grain and get some acidosis, and even, I guess, a bit of subclinical acidosis can raise their body temperature and affect fertility. So that's a little thing that can catch people out. So we just got a few little points on joining management and considerations. So timing of joining, and this goes, is obviously a bigger conversation, but I guess, just be aware, especially for crossbreds and British bred animals, it's really considered out of season before Christmas. So sheep are seasonal, and that they get more fertile as day length shortens, and rams are no different. So so that's just something to be aware of. If you're joining before Christmas, your rams and ewes are a bit out of season there. Merinos are less so. Ram percentages. So, I mentioned right at the start, hopefully we can get 1% plus 1, which will reduce your cost of lambs born. And so what that looks like in reality is for 200 ewes, that's 3 rams, 300 ewes, that's 4 rams. But in certain situations, this may need to be increased, and sometimes that might be if you're joining out of season, if you're using teasers, if you're joining new lambs or maiden hoggets, you might sort of get up to sort of 2%. Also, the use of bigger, if you've got bigger paddocks with multiple water points, you may need to use a higher ram percentage. So 1% plus 1 is, the ideal if everything's right. But there are other sort of situations where you might need to just bump it up a little bit. Heat stress is something to bear in mind. I think leading up to joining is probably the main time where heat stress can cause an issue. So, like we've sort of said multiple times, that temperature effect on sperm quality is a big one. And so in that sort of 42 days or 6 weeks leading up to joining, heat stress has the ability to affect sperm quality. During joining, it probably does a little bit, but I think the effects of heat stress during joining is probably more on the ewes and their ability to cycle and display estrus. And so probably just the consideration there during joining is if you get a heat wave during joining, you may need to extend the joining period by a few weeks because there might be a cohort of ewes that just didn't cycle or just display estrus during that heat wave, and so the rams weren't necessarily affected, but the ewes didn't cycle, and so they'll need to be picked up a bit later on. And if you've got a short joining, they can miss out altogether. And the final thing just to mention here is the use of teasers. We're certainly seeing that become much more popular with our clients. And so the use of teasers is essentially to induce what's called the ram effect, which is was when you see the ram for the first time, it helps to sort of synchronize them. And this can certainly help, and certainly does help when you're joining out of season. So joining before Christmas, ewes are very responsive to the ram effect. And new lambs we also see as being very responsive almost at any time of year up until the depths of autumn. So, we certainly think that teasers used in new lambs is a very good strategy. And so your options for teasers are vasectomized rams or testosterone treated wethers. So vasectomized rams is a procedure where we vasectomize the ram. He remains entire but can't fertilize, whereas testosterone wether, he gets a dose of testosterone before the joining period, and then he acts like a ram. The issue, I guess, with testosterone wethers is that there's some issues around meat withholds, and ideally they shouldn't enter the food chain, and they do need to be retreated each time you want to use them as a teaser, whereas the vasectomized rams can just be used for their lifespan. Teasers need to be used 2 weeks prior to joining, so that 2-week period of the ram effect, and then joining. And then joining happens after that. So 2 weeks. Teasers out 2 weeks before your mating start date. And just a quick note as well, like I've said, with your ram percentages, if you're using teasers, you will need to bump that up to sort of 2% to increase to deal with that demand of that increased ewes coming on heat at the same time. So we're sort of nearly at the end here. So just to summarise all this, hopefully we've got out of that timing's crucial. So we really need to do everything 10 to 12 weeks pre-joining. And like I said, that's to make sure that we're identifying problems, we're making sure that the rams are fit and able to join, and that we're picking up and doing things in terms of husbandry outside of that window where we can affect their sperm quality. So if we ram preparation, if we do that well and we get our rams right, hopefully we can reduce cost per lamb. And some of this other stuff around joining management, which ram preparation is a crucial part of, can really improve reproductive performance. So I've just got here a little bit of a checklist. So, this is something that you can use and go through. So, step number 1, make sure all activities are done 10 to 12 weeks pre-joining. So, you know what date you're going to put the rams out. Let's work back and put it on the calendar and say, righto, this week we do rams, and we get them in and we inspect, we drench, we vaccinate, we shear, we do everything else we need to do. And so, step 2 is the ram inspection. So we do the 4 T's, we body condition score them, we gather that information. Step 3, we drench if they need to be, we vaccinate if they need to, and that's our part of our plan. We need to shear them at this time, and any other husbandry procedures doing it this 10 to 12 weeks pre-joining, and so we give them time to get over that. And then finally, just adjust any nutrition if required, and get them used to anything coming up. So so Jodie, that sort of wraps me up. Questions, let's fire away.
Yeah, we've got a couple come in. So, and the first one that's come in is, what's the effect of wool on the scrotum compared to no wool regarding the temperature effect?
Well, I guess one thing, wool's a good insulator, and so it's probably more around the sudden changes. So, if we shear and take the wool off close to joining, there's probably a bit of a temperature, maybe a temperature shock on the testes, and so they need to get used to that. So that'd be my take on that, I think.
Okay, thank you. Another one about wool. So what's the theory behind the 25 mil wool length for rams going into joining?
It gives them a bit of cover. And like we said, wool, is a good insulator and helps with them maintaining their, regulating their body heat. And so we're getting a little bit of cover there. That helps with that temperature regulation to some extent.
Yes, seems like temperature key factor. And here's another question that relates to temperature.
Yep.
What can we as producers do to manage the effects or the risk of high ambient temperature in the lead up to joining? Or is it just a matter of timing of joining to reduce the risk?
Yeah, it is a hard one because you can't control the weather, as we all know. I guess provision of, access to shade is a good one. Timing of joining, I think, that's got a whole other raft of implications on a farm. So we sort of want to be careful about making decisions around timing of joining. But, probably access to, provision and access of shade. I think that heat's leading up to it is a bit tricky, but certainly during those heat waves during joining, I've had instances where lambing has just stopped, and we tracked it back and thought about it, and it did coincide with a heat wave during joining. So that during joining heat wave is a big one, and I think probably being aware that they're happening and extending joining by maybe a couple of weeks or a cycle to make up for it is a good strategy.
Great, thank you. There's no other questions popped into the Q&A box, Sean. So thank you, Sean, for sharing your insight and expertise with us tonight. We thank everyone who's joined today's webinar. We thank you for your time tonight and wish you a pleasant evening. Thanks.